All right, we're definitely going to finish David Foster Wallace today. I'm very excited about this. Okay, good. I'm sorry for one of my friends watches some of these videos, and she mentioned that I kind of make her sick by spinning the camera around, but it's like a little cold out here, so I feel like I have to keep moving in order to kind of stay warm, and also I like to walk around while I'm thinking. So I mean, you guys have seen me in the class. I move around a lot. So let's wrap up the David Foster Wallace. This is cool. Okay, good. All right, so again, he says, so look, maybe their feelings aren't as complicated as yours are. Maybe the feelings that animals have are pretty simple and your feelings are very complicated. But so what? The fact that the animal has feelings at all, the fact that it has simple preferences, means maybe we shouldn't violate those preferences by killing them. And of course, crucially, we're only killing. This is the other troubling thing about eating meat is your instinct, I think, is to be like, look, it's food, I gotta eat. But you don't actually have to eat animals. It's normal to eat animals in our society. People do eat animals. Everybody, like, huge numbers of people do it, and so it feels normal. You don't think you grow up in this society, everybody's eating meat around you. You start eating meat, and you don't think about it. But the issue here is that you don't have to. You could just eat plants and beans and shit. Um, Tofu. Um, the problem is that when you realize you don't have to eat animals, then you start thinking, well, does that mean I'm not killing animals to stay alive? I'm just killing animals for fun. Because meat, I think meat is more fun to eat than plants. I enjoy it more. I have a preference. Now, the issue is, why is it that my preference for enjoyment is more valuable to me than the animal's preference not to be killed? Why am I value theory, right? What do you value more than? Why is it that human beings, myself included, value the enjoyment of eating meat is valued higher than the pain an animal experiences? Now, some people go, listen, it's not about pleasure. I need food to eat. But since you don't have to eat animals, you could eat plants. It really actually does kind of feel like it's just entertainment. And this raises all kinds of disturbing issues, which is that here's the big question, the big philosophy question. Actually, I'm going to say this big philosophy question for the end. Let's see if I can remember it. Let's do the David Foster Wallace. I have bigger questions though, because you know me, I like my philosophy, and I got big things to talk about. So, okay, so let's take a look at this. He said, why is a primitive, inarticulate form of suffering less urgent or uncomfortable for the person who's helping to inflict it by paying for the food it results in? Right? Like, why is it that we don't care that animals' pain is like maybe simpler than ours? He says, I'm not trying to give you a PETA-like screed here. PETA is an animal rights active, a group that fights for animal rights. Screed is like a crazy rant. He says, I don't want to do a crazy rant. At least I don't think so. Because sometimes it sounds like he's trying to, sometimes he's worried. Does it sound like, because PETA, which is an animal rights activist group, they kind of yell at people and make them feel like shit so that they won't eat meat anymore. And David Foster Wallace says, that's not what I'm trying to do here. He says, I know, because I'm talking about animal pain a lot. It seems like I'm trying to tell you eating animals is wrong. But that's not what he's doing. He's going to tell you what he is doing. He's thinking, and he wants you to think, like Socrates. I'm so glad I taught that Socrates this semester. He says, I'm not trying to give you a PETA-like screed here, right? He's not trying to go on some crazy, vegetarian rant. I'm trying, rather, to work out and articulate. Articulate means put into words. That's what you guys have to do for your papers. I'm trying, rather, to work out and articulate some of the troubling questions that arise amid all the laughter and saltation and community pride of the Maine Lobster Festival. The truth is that if you, the festival attendee, the person going to the festival, permit yourself to think that lobsters can suffer and would rather not, the MLF begins to take on the aspect of something like a Roman circus or medieval torture fest. So he's not trying to convince you to be a vegetarian, but what he does want you to do is, most people just eat meat and they don't think about it. What he wants you to do is think about it, and think about why. What are your reasons? Do you even have reasons? One thing that happens is when you're a kid, you just grow up in society, and your parents tell you, okay, eat this. And then 20, 30, 40 years go by, and you've been eating meat your whole life, and you've never really thought about it. You just do it automatically. There's lots of things that when you grow up in a society, they just seem normal. And so you never think about it. You just do it without thinking about it. Um, so what David Foster Wallace wants you to do, he's not telling you what to do. He just wants you to think about it because most people never think about it. And he asks for reasons. He really wants you to sort of consider it. Because he says, and I think this is a great phrase here. He says, if you permit yourself to think that lobsters suffer and would rather not, then when you go to a lobster festival, it just looks like a giant torture chamber for lobsters. And most people don't want to think about that. They go to the lobster festival for fun, and they don't want to think about all the animals that are being hurt there. Okay, 2 paragraphs left. Let's wrap it up. All right, so he says, does that comparison seem like a bit much? Meaning, like, is he being a little is he exaggerating a little bit when he compares killing lobsters to a torture festival? He says, if so, exactly why? Like, why is it too much? Or what about this one? Is it possible that future generations will regard our present agribusiness, that's like the business of agriculture, of eating and producing food, is it possible that future generations will regard our present agribusiness with eating practices in much the same way we now view Nero's entertainments or Mengele's experiments? Oh my God. Okay, I'm just going to put the camera down for a second and just, okay. All right, so okay, I have to do this. All right, Nero's entertainments or Mengele's experiments. You're going to need a footnote and you don't have one, so it's my job to give it to you, and I really wish I didn't have to do that. Nero is an ancient Roman emperor who used to torture people for entertainment. He was like a serial killer who was also the president of the country. And he was a very, very bad person who would do things like take a big metal hollow sculpture of a bull, and then he would put a human being into it and then roast them over a fire, and he would hear them screaming, and he thought that was fun. Obviously, he's a horrible, horrible person. But Nero was essentially he was a terrible emperor who enjoyed torturing people for entertainment. Mengele, I really wish I didn't have to do this. Mengele was a medical doctor for the Nazis in Nazi Germany. Mengele is considered to be one of the worst human beings who ever lived, because what Mengele did is he did experiments, but he did his experiments on human beings. The Jewish people, Hitler was, I don't know how much you know about your World War II history, but Germany in the late 30s and early 40s rounded up Jews and put them into concentration camps where they killed millions and millions of them because they blamed them for the problems in the country. They didn't deserve the blame, but they needed to blame somebody for their problems, so they blamed the Jews, and they rounded them up and killed them. Before they killed them, sometimes Dr. Mengele was like, hey, give me some Jews. I want to do crazy science experiments on them. And he was torturing people. He was just trying to find out, he was doing weird experiments on the human body for science or whatever, but really he was just hurting people. And he claimed on learning a lot of things about the human body, but he was just doing, I'm not even going to describe the shit he was doing, but he was basically doing medical experiments on living people that was subjecting them to huge amounts of pain. He was cutting things out of them to find out if they could stay alive, that kind of thing. At what temperature does the brain start cooking when a person is alive, like that kind of shit. So David Foster Wallace raises the question. He says, we look back at people like Mengele and Nero. These are horrible people from previous centuries. He says, I wonder if people in the future will look back at us eating all these lobsters and think that we're terrible, right? We look back on Nero and Mengele as being terrible. And he says, I wonder if future generations will look back at us eating all these animals and be like, oh, they were such barbarians. By the way, I'm not really sure. I like David Foster Wallace, but I don't really like that point. I think that people back then knew that Nero was a bad guy. And I think most people knew Dr. Mengele was a bad guy at the time. Whereas the people at the Maine Lobster Festival, it's only really hardcore vegetarians that think those people are really bad. So I'm not really sure that's the best example. But that's David Foster Wallace's example. I don't think it really works as a very good example. Because Mengele and Nero, I think most people could have agreed they were bad at the time. Whereas that's not really true of the people at the Maine Lobster Festival. Okay, anyway, next video.